Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. I'm your host Mike, and on this week's episode we bring you Magda, Brazen Outlaw at a $100 budget. Magda is 1 in a red for legendary creature, Dwarf Berserker. She has other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. Sacrifice 5 treasures. Search your library for an artifact or dragon card. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. All prices in this video are powered by TCG Player. If you guys are going to be shopping on TCG Player, it would mean the world to me if you guys would use my affiliate link, which I'll put up on the screen right now, and it will also be in the show notes down below. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help the channel out quite a bit if you use that affiliate link. We also want to thank our other sponsor, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield has some of the best sleeves and Magic the Gathering accessories on the market at a very affordable price. If you go to our affiliate link, it will take you to the website, and there you'll see all the different products that they offer. With Magda, we want to get as many cheap dwarves as we can onto the battlefield, and then we're going to use those dwarves to either attack or in some other way to get them tapped so we can generate treasures whenever a dwarf becomes tapped. So we do have some other ways of tapping our dwarves in here outside of combat because we don't want to rely solely on combat, but that is the main way that we have of tapping our creatures down. And then once we get 5 treasures or more, we can go and search our library for our big stuff that we have in here, our dragons, our big artifacts, and then we're going to basically cheat them out. And we can do this really early on in the game as long as we have a couple of dwarves to start off our chain. The main way that this deck wins is basically through combat damage. So we're going to be able to put out these big creatures and big artifacts onto the battlefield quickly, and then we'll be able to kill our opponents by swinging in with those dragons. A lot of them do have very powerful effects, board wipes, and different things on them that make them very powerful. So next up, we're going to talk about the stats of this deck. So we've got 11 ramp spells, we've got 7 ways of drawing cards, we've got 8 interaction spells, 15 dwarves, we've got 16 payoffs that will work off of Magda's ability that we can search up in our deck, and then we've got 35 lands in here. So first up, let's go over some of the ramp that we have in this deck. Now, most of the ramp that we're going to find is from mana rocks, and we do have a couple of red spells in here that are going to increase our mana for 1 turn only. Mono red's not the greatest color at ramping, so we do have to rely on artifacts and other ways of ramping. So first up, we've got Soul Ring. It taps to add 2. We've got Wayfarer's Bubble. Lets you search for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped. And then Explorer Scope is a nice one, especially in a deck that cares about attacking. Whenever you attack, you can look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then we've got Springleaf Drum. Tap an untapped creature you control, add a mana of any color. This is great because it allows you to tap your dwarves, which is something that you really want to do, and it also helps you get some mana off of it as well. We've got Fire Diamond. Enters the battlefield tapped, you get to add a red. Mind Stone, you can tap it to add a colorless, but you can also sacrifice this later in the game and you don't need it anymore to get a card off of it. Then we got Solemn. It enters the battlefield. You get to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. When it dies, you get to draw a card as well. And then Mana Geyser is a very powerful card. You can add red to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponents control. So you can go really crazy with this card if your opponents have a lot of tapped lands. Then you can play your dragons and other big things. You don't have to rely on Magda's ability. Next up, let's talk about some of the interaction that we have in this deck. Now, we don't have a whole ton of interaction in here because it is mono red, but we do have a couple of ways of interacting with our opponents, especially if they play blue spells or countering blue spells if our opponents try to counter our stuff. So first up, we've got Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast. Both of these are going to let us counter a blue spell or destroy a blue permanent, which is really great. Then we got Chaos Warp, which is a dangerous removal spell, but the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they get to put it onto the battlefield. Vandal Blast is a sorcery that lets you destroy an artifact, but also has overload, so you can destroy all artifacts except for the ones that you don't control. Next up, let's talk about some of the card draw that we have in this deck. Now, in mono red, there's not a ton of card draw, so really it's a lot of filtering through our library and things like that. So there's not really a whole lot of ways of drawing cards in mono red. We did go with the ones that we could find at a budget. So first up, we've got Faithless Looting. It lets you draw 2 cards, but then you discard 2. Nice thing about this is it does have flashback as well. Then we've got Cathartic Reunion. You got to discard 2 cards to draw 3, and then Thrill of Possibility. You discard a card, you get to draw 2. Then we got a couple of wheels in here. One of them's a wheel that's just for us, so we can put any number of cards from our hand on the bottom of our library and then draw that many cards +1. Then we've got Wheel of Misfortune, so budget Wheel of Fortune, and this one basically will let the players that want to wheel wheel, and the ones that don't have to. And then we've got Sandstone Oracle. This is one that you can fetch up with Magda if you're running low on cards in your hand, and then it basically, when it enters the battlefield, if a player has more cards in hand than you get to draw cards equal to the difference. Next up, let's talk about all the dwarves that we have in this deck. Now, I did want to go with dwarves that have a low converted mana cost. There's a lot of other dwarves that you can put in here that have powerful tap abilities, but they cost like 4 mana, 3 mana. It's just too much. I wanted to get the dwarves down as early as possible. You can swing in with them and then use some of the other tappers that we have in here, like the vehicles, or some of the other cards that we have in here to tap them down when needed. So I did prefer to go with low converted mana cost dwarves. So first up, we've got Spark Mage. Whenever it deals damage to a player, you may have it deal 1 damage to target creature that player controls. Dwarven Scorcher, you can sack it to deal 1 damage to target creature, unless its controller has it deal 2 damage to him or her. X-Guard Cavalry is nice because you can tap it and give target creature haste until end of turn, which is nice with your dragons. When you put them on the battlefield, Magda does not give them haste, so this card can give them haste, which is nice. Then we've got Dwarven Blast Miner. This is another tapper that you can tap to destroy target non-basic land, which is really great. And then Dwarven Miner does the exact same thing for the exact same mana cost. The only difference is one has morph and one doesn't. Vault Robber is another tapper. You can pay 1 and tap it to exile a creature card from your graveyard and create a treasure token. Then we've got Dwarven Weaponsmith. It has tap during your upkeep at a 1/1 counter to any creature. Each time you use this ability, you must sacrifice an artifact. And then 7 dwarves. We do have all 7 of them in here. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature named 7 dwarf, and a deck can have up to 7 cards named 7 dwarves. And then probably the best dwarf in this deck outside of Magda is Dwarven Recruiter. When it comes into play, search your library for any number of 7 dwarf cards and reveal them. Shuffle your library, then put them on top of your library in any order. I like to use this card to get all 7 of my dwarves on top of my library. You can use them to find your other dwarves if you'd like as well. All right, so let's talk about all of the big, beefy creatures and artifacts that we have in here that we're going to be able to search up with Magda. So we've got Gadrick, the Crown Scourged. It can't attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts. At the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. So this is really nice because it helps you get some more treasures as well. Then we've got Leyline Tyrant. You don't lose unspent mana as steps and phases end, and when it dies, you may pay any amount of red. When you do, it deals that much damage to any target. So this is a nice way of charging up your mana a little bit. Then we've got Hoarding Dragon. It enters the battlefield. You may search your library for an artifact card, exile it, then shuffle your library, and when it dies, you may put that card into your hand, which is nice. Then we've got Steel Hellkite. This is basically a board wipe on a stick. So it has destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate it only once per turn. Hellkite Charger gives you an additional combat step when it attacks and you pay 7 mana. And then Soul of New Phyrexia is a nice one that helps give your permanents indestructible. So you can pay 5 and all your permanents get indestructible until end of turn, or you can pay 5 and exile it from your graveyard in the same ability as well. Then we've got Lathlis, Dragon Queen. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/5 red dragon creature with flying, and she can also fire breathing for all your dragons as well. Then we've got Meteor Golem. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Dragon Mage. When it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. This is nice to have an extra card draw spell in here, another wheel. We don't have a lot of ways of drawing cards in this deck, so having a dragon that we can search up with Magda, be able to do that is nice. Then we've got Knoll Spine Dragon. This one was really expensive until it was recently reprinted, I think in mystery boosters. When it comes into play, you may discard your hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to a target opponent this turn. With a bunch of dragons and other ways of dealing a ton of damage to your opponents, this is going to help you draw a lot of cards, which is something that we desperately need in this deck. Terror of Mount Velis. This is a dragon that has flying and double strike. And when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. So this can close out a game real quickly. You can search this up with Magda and swing out with all your creatures, and you should be able to win, hopefully. And then we've got Dracuseth, Maw of Flames. Whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. This is a nice way of dealing a lot of damage. Then we've got Utvara Hellkite. This is a expensive dragon, but I do feel like it is worth it in this deck. And whenever a dragon you control attacks, create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying, and that's whenever any dragon attacks. So if you attack with 3 dragons, you're going to make 3 more dragons, which is going to get out of hand pretty quickly. Phyrexian Triniform is one out of Commander Legends. It's a 9 mana artifact creature. When it dies, create 3 colorless Golem artifact creature tokens. And then this one is nice because it also has Encore, so you can make 3 copies of it. And then when they all die, you'll get 3 Golems as well. Next up, let's talk about some of the ways that we have of tapping our dwarves down. Now, one of the easiest ways of doing that is with vehicles. So we did include quite a few vehicles in the deck that we can crew. And we did want to go with ones that give us an additional advantage. So we've got Smuggler's Copter. When it attacks or blocks, you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Cultivator's Caravan is a mana rock that you can also crew, and it's a 5/5 creature. And then Mobile Garrison, whenever it attacks, you get to untap another target artifact or creature you control. So you can crew this, attack with it, and then untap the thing that you crewed with it, which is kind of cool. And then you can tap it again. Then we've got Honor Worn Shaku. It's a mana rock, and then you can tap and untap legendary permanent you control to untap Honor Worn Shaku. You can use this to tap your Magda to get a treasure, and then untap your Honor Worn Shaku to get an additional mana. Chiron Negotiations is one of the better cards in this deck. It's tap and untap creature you control, and it deals 1 damage to target player. And then we've got Cryptic Gateway. Tap 2 untap creatures you control. You may put a creature card from your hand into play that shares a creature type with each creature tapped this way. So you can use this to tap 2 creatures, put a dwarf into the battlefield. You can also do it with your dragons later too, but you're probably going to be swinging with those, so not as... And then last but not least, we've got Burn at the Stake. It's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Burn at the Stake deals damage to target creature or player equal to 3 times the number of creatures tapped this way. Next up, let's talk about some of the utility cards, or cards that really don't fit into other categories that we include in this deck. So first up, we've got cards that help us make treasure tokens. So we've got Brass's Bounty. It's a 7 mana sorcery. For each land you control, you're going to create a treasure artifact token. And then Treasure Map is an artifact that you can pay 1 and tap it to scry 1 and put a landmark counter on it. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove them and transform Treasure Map and create 3 treasure tokens. And then it flips into Treasure's Cove. It's a land that has tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can tap and sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. This is powerful if Magda's not on the battlefield or is getting removed a million times. You can use your treasures in a different way to draw some cards as well. Then we got a couple of modal double-face cards. We've got Kazul's Fury and Songmad Treachery. Kazul's Fury, you can sack a creature, and then that creature deals its damage to any target. Songmad Treachery is a way of stealing a creature and giving it haste that you can swing with it. These are really just great in any deck that has red, because it really doesn't cost you really anything extra, because they're a land in your deck whenever you need it as well. So I do try to include double-face cards that have land on the back as much as I can. It's going to help you smooth out getting your lands, and also gives you a spell if you ever need it as well. Then we've got another way of making additional combat steps. We've got Seize the Day. This is one of the cheaper versions that are out there. I like this one because it has flashback. So you can untap target creature. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Then we've got Inspiring Statuary. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise, and Improvise is your artifacts can help cast those spells. Each artifact that you tap counts for a colorless mana. So you can use your treasures to tap for mana to cast your non-artifact spells, which is really nice. Then we've got Descent of the Dragons. It's a sorcery. You can destroy any number of target creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Let's just say you need to close out the game. You can kill all your 1/1 dwarves off, all your 7 dwarves, whatever, and make a bunch of dragons with them and swing out and kill your opponents. Then we've got Maskwood Nexus. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. And then you can pay 3, tap it, create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So this will turn all your dwarves into dragons, all your dragons into dwarves, etc., which is nice. It's a really great card in the deck. We have a lot of synergy with dragons and synergy with dwarves in our deck. So this is a nice way of melding them all together and making all your creatures all creature types. Then we've got Bag of Holding. This is another way of pseudo drawing cards. It's a 1 mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. You can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. You can pay 4, tap it, sacrifice it, return all cards exiled with Bag of Holding to their owner's hands. Since we don't have a ton of card draw in here, with something like this on the battlefield and you go to wheel, get all those 7 cards back, you can pay 4, get them all back into your hand. It's going to help us with our card draw deficiency that we have in here over the course of the game. And then last but not least, we have another way of putting our creatures onto the battlefield if our Magda plan does not work out. We've got Perforos Bronze-Blooded. It's a legendary creature enchantment with Indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste, which is really important in this deck of having ways of having haste. Getting those dragons on the battlefield and being able to swing on that same turn is important. And then you can pay 2 and a red. You may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you like this video and you want to see more Budget Commander content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also check us out on patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a bunch of different tiers and ways to interact with us outside of YouTube. We'll see you guys next time.